Hey folks, how are you? I'm back. Another book review. And today we're reviewing How Music Works by David Byrne, most famously known as the singer of the Talking Heads. I saw this book on a bookshelf a couple of years ago, I think in Barnes & Noble, and it looked interesting. It's a tome. It's like 368 pages, kind of big pages too. It's long, but it's long in part because it's kind of a hybrid. Like, it's a little bit of a rock star memoir. He does talk a little bit about his career and making some of his music. He tells you a little bit about the writing of Once in a Lifetime and that kind of thing. But a lot of the book is just about various aspects of music itself, not necessarily his music. And that's really the majority of the book. What's interesting about this book, even when he talks about his career, though, conspicuously absent, you expect in all these rock memoirs they're all gonna like dish on like some dirt, and there's absolutely no dirt. But you know, most like Motley Crue, when they wrote their book, they literally called it The Dirt. And by the way, I read that book also early on in the pandemic, in its own way, also a great book. Very different from David Byrne's book, as you might expect. But he doesn't talk about any issues he ever had with the Talking Heads, even though I Googled it, and sure enough, they had an acrimonious breakup. A lot of it had to do with apparently David Byrne might actually be a little bit of a jerk. He was trying to cede full songwriting credit on a lot of things, and which the other band members said, no, we were involved with. Why are you stealing the whole song? And this is the thing that breaks up so many bands. It's all about like battling over publishing. The Police, for another example, where like Sting, big shocker, he also apparently did this. Like Every Breath You Take, their biggest hit, he wrote the song. Well, he wrote the chord progression. I think he wrote the lyrics. But Andy Summers, the guitar player, came up with the chord voicing arpeggio, which changed the sound of the song completely, and said, well, why don't I get credit? And then sure enough, the Police didn't last long. Other bands, the bands that seem to last, they seem to like split it. I believe U2, I believe they split it 4 ways. REM split it 4 ways. They broke up, but I think they retired. And these bands got along. The Stones, I think it's all pretty much understood. It's all Mick and Keith writing the songs, and they split it 50-50. Everyone accepts it. But it's when they get into this gray area of who should get credit that's what breaks bands up. But anyway, I'm getting off topic already to the book. A lot of what he talks about in the book is the pragmatic ends of music, and how a lot of music creation is not like some mystical quality that the gods speak to you and that determines what kind of song you write. That it's dictated by a lot of practical concerns, including, he goes to this thing talking about venues. He talks about going back to the Middle Ages when they were playing all these things in cathedrals, which had all this echo and reverb. Well, what kind of music are you going to make? You can't make really rhythmically complex music with all these key changes, because it'll just turn into mush. So all these medieval like things where it had this droning long notes to emphasize the reverb, it was kind of like the trance music of its time. Although I don't think a lot of people did a lot of ecstasy in the churches. But the music suits the venue, not the other way around. He talks about that's true all the way up to the present day, when bands in the 70s started playing hockey and basketball arenas. And the music became what? Arena rock. And you start writing these up anthems. Journey's Don't Stop Believin', or Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer. It's like music designed to sound great in a hockey arena. The venue determines the song as much as anything else. I was listening because, all the press about Taylor Swift's latest album, The Tortured Poet Society. I skimmed it. I liked one song, and the rest I was like, I don't know. I noticed her music, I think, recently, a lot of reverb, not only in the instruments, but on her voice as well. Like, it can sound almost like she's singing from a cave. Now, a lot of pop music does this. And maybe that's all it is, but I wonder if a lot of it has to do with where does she play live. She plays football stadiums, soccer stadiums overseas, the biggest venues. Where you go to one of those shows, it's a huge you're going to be sitting further away. The sound takes a little while to travel, and it echoes against the back walls. It creates a very echoey, reverby sound. So she might be mixing her records to suit how it's going to sound live when you go to the show, so it won't be too jarring a transition. So again, it's the venue determining the song, not the other way around. He also talks a little bit about in relation to recording, and how, like, when they first started recording music, it was primitive by today's standards. You recorded direct to a disc. This was before even there was tape that you could record to, and long before digital recording. And how jazz bands and such would have to like change how they played and change how they sang. And a lot of people would hear these records and they thought, oh, that's what jazz sounds like, because they hadn't heard it live. And they started making their records to suit what they thought jazz sounded like, even though they only modified it to suit the technical limitations, and how the recording aspects also determine how the music is, not the other way around. He also mentions something else that's really interesting. He says when he started to record music, it created, with both singing styles and with playing of stringed instruments, the increased use of vibrato, when you basically are vibrating the string, vibrating your voice right after you hit the note. And this had previously not been it has been frowned upon in music. It was considered an ugly effect. They started using it in recorded music because if you hit a note, it's just a little bit off pitch. Everyone started to worry that, oh, now this is going on record, and people can hear this at the end of the time. Whereas if you're playing live, people might not even notice. Vibrato, because you're kind of like vibrating the notes slightly, just slightly, maybe off pitch, almost intentionally, it masks any pitch imperfections. And it was like the auto-tune of its day. You didn't have auto-tune machines, but people sought a way to create some kind of auto-tune where if you're out-of-tune, who cares? Which I thought was pretty interesting. He also talks a couple different times about songwriting. Of course, he's a musician himself, and he's a songwriter himself. And he talks about how everyone thinks when you write a song, again, the muses speak to you, you channel the gods, you get put in a trance, and the song comes out, and it's all deeply autobiographical. And he says, people think everything you write is autobiographical, even when you do a cover song. They assume, well, that choice of the cover song, you're also speaking deeply about what's deep in your soul and everything else. And he says this is not always the case at all. And he says basically a lot of times when you write a song, it's like you sit down one day, you're not necessarily feeling any strong emotions or the spirit is moving you. You just, pick up a guitar and you try, let me move my fingers here. I haven't tried this. What does this sound like? And you say, oh, this sounds good. And that's how you build a song. And then the emotion comes from that. That it's not emotion creates music. It's music creates emotion. And you create the song and then you feel some emotion, but it's like, music is an emotion-creating machine, and not the other way around, but nobody thinks that way. It doesn't sound as romantic. I even heard one time, again, someone you wouldn't associate as much with David Byrne, but it was I think it was a YouTube clip that came up with Billy Joel talking on MTV to Martha Quinn in the 80s, and he said about the same thing. He said songwriting is you sit down in the morning in front of the piano with a cup of coffee, and you're like, I gotta start writing. Just start playing the piano, see what comes out, and then pretty soon you have a song. And it's like you're not divinely inspired. You just plug away, and there it happens. And he also talks about how when you write a song, a lot of the creative process is like you come up with one kernel of an idea, and this sort of leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. So it does create a sense of almost like you're along for the ride, and almost the song's writing you. I heard another analogy. One person said that songwriting is like a Ouija board. You put your finger down in one spot, and then the board itself moves you to other spots. And so that was kind of interesting. He talks a lot also about the music industry, and boy, does he really want to talk a lot about how musicians get ripped off. Now, obviously, this is a lot of true. Many musicians sign these contracts, which they're not, especially when they're young, they're not savvy business people. They're young, they're musicians, they spend all their time learning music, not learning to read the fine print of legal contracts, and they get into these awful exploitative contracts, and they get ripped off. But he even says, just regardless, the whole system is set up to screw over the musician, and particularly with record contracts. And a lot of times what happens with the musicians is they get lured and tricked basically by the advance. If they sign you a contract, they might throw you a whole bunch of money up front, and you go, oh my God, I'm rich. The problem is that may be about the last money you see. And you think, you may be like, where's my cut of let's say you have a hit record. Where's my cut of it? And no, the record company took all that. And a lot of the money they give you with the advance is really just money basically to help you pay off the debt they're about to put you in. Because the cost of recording, the cost of touring, everything they're charging to you and going to ask for you to pay back later. And he says, even to the point of those dinners they bought you, which you thought were such a nice gesture, comes back later. Hey, remember that dinner? Oh, you owe us this much amount of money. And so he's really big on talking about how really the whole system is always meant to screw over musicians. And he does talk particularly about the recording of records. He doesn't talk. Now we know that, it's more money making more from tours, but of course he also tells you about, but tours have all these expenses. So even if the tickets are expensive, you got to pay the crew and you got to pay for the stage show, and on and on and on. Now, is he exaggerating a little bit? I did want him at one point. He does go through painstakingly detailed to talk about how on a couple of his albums, what he got paid in advance and what he ended up with, and it was, one album he only made in net profit $86,000. Another he made a little more. It was like $200,000. But he says this amounted to like 3 years of work, and you didn't really make much money. Now I did want him at one point to say, yeah, okay, but Dave, but what is your net worth? Because is he exaggerating a little bit? And he didn't say. I did Google it. I don't know how reliable those sites are. You can always Google celebrities, what's your net worth. They listed about 40 million, maybe 40 to 60 million, which probably, because he was part of the golden age in the 70s and 80s when Talking Heads formed, when, you still made a lot. You could still, the record companies were filled with cash, and musicians, you could make money off records. And how touring in those days was just considered a means to promote the record. It was really about selling records. Now it's the reverse. Now it's all about touring, because artists don't make much off of streaming and everything else. But yeah, he really, I think he wants to convince you that a lot of like famous musicians, not Taylor Swift, who's a billionaire, not the Rolling Stones, but the vast majority of musicians, even ones you might know some of their songs on the radio, they're not nearly as rich as you think they are. A lot of them make what amounts to kind of a middle class salary, and so he's I don't know. Speaking of MTV, he also talks about how, I never heard this. You always see these memes on social media. MTV turned 45 today. Let's celebrate 14 years of music, and people blame MTV because they abandoned their music format and started showing, Jersey Shore and what was it, 14 pregnant or something. I don't know, something about being pregnant. And hi Artie, my cat. She doesn't like when I talk. She's like, "Why are you talking to yourself? Are you nuts? Are you insane? What are you doing?" So anyway, my cat Artemis. Anyway, so he points out how what originally happened with MTV was they just gave the videos to MTV, and they saw MTV raking in all these profits, and the record companies got greedy. They started charging MTV for their videos. Now, this was ridiculous because actually MTV was acting as an amazing promotional tool for the artists and for the record companies. And to the point where I remember in MTV, they would show the artist, the song, the album title, and the record company. Like as a way, like just telling you, we're promoting the record company. I'd always be like, who cares what the record company is? But so it became less profitable for MTV because suddenly they're getting charged for showing music. And he speculates this may have had a lot to do with why they shifted away from doing this and just went into their own homemade, programming. He talks a lot about the what are we doing on time here? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know this. We'll try to get through this quick. So he talks about how classical music is all this. There's a whole industry that pumps into the fine arts in terms of music, classical music, ballet, opera, etc. And we fund it with tax dollars. And also, it's a very, very popular thing for rich people to do, to become patron of the arts and to pour all this money into these opera houses, which they have to do because the audience for these is not a Stones or Taylor Swift concert in a football stadium. And they basically are propping it up. It's a form of welfare to keep the arts alive, but it's seen as it's like medicine for the soul to go watch a Handel or a Bach performance. And so we do it anyway, but a lot of times there's an elitism, it's a way for people to feel special hierarchy. And so he bemoans the fact that we put all this effort into this and put less effort into funding music education. In fact, he points out how with No Child Left Behind, it actually decreased in schools. He argues that what's really beneficial from a societal perspective, what is the true medicine for a society, isn't necessarily going to see, Beethoven's Ninth at the, Lincoln Center or wherever they perform it. It's people learning to play music itself. There's a benefit, emotional benefit, to, even if you're not great at it, that you should be going and playing music, and that we as a society don't encourage that. And this has been a problem. He even goes back in the beginning of the book and talks about how people, with the advent of recorded music 100 years ago, a lot of people saw this as a terrible thing, because all of a sudden this idea that the social aspect of music, where you go and hear it play in a group, the idea that you sit at home with a record player by yourself listening to music was horrifying to people, and it meant that less people, if you wanted to hear music, you didn't have to play it anymore. So you could just Artie, I'm almost done. Almost done, Artie. So you could it's a little distracting. I'm not starting over. So you could it discouraged in some ways people learning music when you could just play back recorded music. A lot of more people used to have pianos in their house, and they had bought sheet music and music as a participatory thing. And he basically argues that we don't encourage that enough. We make it all about consumption. Even the early record players, originally you could actually record yourself with record players. This is again before tape, and the record company said no, we don't want that, because then we don't want people making their own music. We wanted them to consume and buy the records. And so there's always this push and pull between music consumption and creation, and he, of course, as a musician himself, comes out heavily in the side of creation. The final thing I'm going to say is he talks at the very end of why do we love music, and he quotes this scientist who argues that we don't actually love music in the same way we love cheesecake. Our senses, our taste buds have evolved. We just inherently love the taste of cheesecake because we've evolved to like sugar and fat. Because maybe at an early point in our evolutionary phase, this kept us alive and was good for us, not so much maybe modern society. He argues that maybe we don't actually inherently love music. We only love the things that it can bring indirectly. And one of the things he talks about is, for example, this idea of music, playing in a musical band with other musicians, or dance where you're working in coordination with the other dancers. It gives you, both the participant and the viewer and the listener, this sense of unity of you're no longer just yourself, and you're unified, and it's you become this collective organism, and this as human beings is very satisfying to us, and that's what music does, even to the point where there's a speculation of, is this is it because that's human nature, or did that very act of music and dance itself create what we call human nature? Do we like dance because we're human? I mean, did humanity create dance, or did dance create humanity? And it's an interesting idea. He also focuses in the last chapter on all kinds of quasi-spiritual theories on music and how musical notes correspond to the positioning of the star. And we won't get into that. Anyway, that's a good book, interesting book, huge book. And I'm gonna go because Artie probably wants me to shut the F up. So I'm gonna, and until next time.